yes, polluters should pay. Are you operating under the assumption that you should pay until you find another way, or that indeed you will just operate a business and be taxed because it's polluting?
Well, I mean, obviously, if we can, if somebody managed to come up with an idea to extract carbon out of the Earth's atmosphere, we could then regulate the Earth's atmosphere. We can pollute in order to heat it up, or we can extract it, and we could balance the Earth's atmosphere. So none of these problems need exist, and therefore we could do away with the need for for taxes of this kind. But since the chances of that happening must be less likely than likely, in time anyway, then I think a fair, equitable tax, which is equally distributed amongst all airlines, the major Western airlines, and then there may be some balance with some of the other airlines, and shipping and others, that it should be done. And then that money, instead of us living with dead rainforests in the future, that money maybe can go towards keeping our rainforests alive and flourishing, and can be used in positive ways.
I just wanted to react to this notion of the technological fix and taking CO2 out of the atmosphere. I just hope that if that happens, that the fix also takes SO2, nitrous oxide, and particulate matter out of the atmosphere, that it also takes pollution out of water, and that it puts natural resources back into the ground. Because part of the problem, I think, is that we really have to find a sustainable solution to this issue, and that in a way, yes, there are some ways of dealing with the symptoms, for example, carbon capture and storage, but we do need some more fundamental changes than that.
Well, the point I want to make is that we should focus more on the practical needs of the vulnerable and small countries like the Maldives, Marshall Islands, and other countries that are really affected right now by climate change. Thank you.
Can I come in on this practical action? Is that okay?
Yep.
I mean, you talked about the markets not functioning. I think the markets are functioning. And you, Mr. President, talked about practical action. The approach that we have at the moment is that rich nations have targets to reduce their emissions. They have the opportunity to achieve those targets by investing in developing countries and reducing emissions there, which leads to an investment in sustainable development. And then we tax that transaction in order to pay for adaptation. And if we can, I think, amplify that architecture, we're on the right road.
Rather than building walls around islands and cities, is seeing whether giant inland lakes could be maybe made in Asia or Africa. It may only say take a couple of inches of the sea. The sea. I haven't done the figures, but it may be more economical than if the global community were to do a study of that as a possibility.
Now, when we are talking about the sea level rising, I think that the war room that you are establishing is extremely important. I mean, how much is going to be the cost of that? I have been in the Marshall Islands twice, and it seems to me that it's possible to find some kind of solutions. So I think there are some solutions. The question is political will, and in addition to political will, what kind of financing are we going to have?
Yeah, back to political will again, and I do think that we can galvanize a constituency around notions of equity and justice. That's very different from the traditional approach to aid, where there's an aid fatigue to some extent. Jeff Sachs is sitting in the front row, is very eloquent about the problems that we face.
I think for solutions, we have to remember that climate change is hitting absolutely everywhere and core parts of the world economy. This is not an issue of marginal and poor people. This is an issue of everybody. Arnold Schwarzenegger just declared a drought emergency in California. And that's a pretty core part of the US economy, which is a pretty core part of the world economy. They're stopping development throughout California now because of water stress, which will get worse because of climate change. We've got massive floods in the American Midwest, extreme weather events in the Gulf of Mexico impeding development. I think it's important not to take the view that this is about the poor. This is about everybody. Of course, the poor get hit hardest because they have the least buffer. But if we portray this as an issue about the poor, it won't get solved. This is an issue about the whole world.
My name is Eric Rasmussen. I'm the CEO of Instead, which is a small organization founded by Google. An underpinning that I've heard at the beginning of this discussion this morning is a simple and I think fundamental question that will help me frame what we're doing here for these 2 days. And that is, who in the world is in charge? Who do these 5 young people go to ask for constructive action and have some hope that there will be something actually transpiring as a consequence? When we developed some tools at Instead that we thought would be useful, we went out looking around and could not find a single point of contact.
I think the answer to your question at a high level of abstraction is the leaders of the world, the elected leaders of the world who are supposed to be taking us towards a global solution on this issue, because unless they show as leaders leadership that actually gets emissions going down and therefore creates demand for the kind of technologies which presumably you're talking about, nothing is going to happen. So it's those world leaders that need to be confronted with their leadership responsibility.
Although we agree that all human beings are equal, we cannot agree that all leaders are equal. What international weight do I carry? I have one voice at the United Nations out of 190 odd nations there. But real power is not in the hands of small countries. It's in the hands of the polluting countries, the industrialized countries. So their responsibility is much more higher than our own responsibility. We are paying for the crimes that the industrialized nations have committed already. So we should not be asked as elected leaders to answer that question, but I think only the polluting nations, leaders of the polluting nations, will have to answer that question. Thank you.
Can we get a mic here?
The reason I had my hand up was, yes, we need governments, we need leaders at a global level, at a national level. But a survey which I work at HSBC, which HSBC did, showed that in countries like India, people were not looking to governments, were not looking to others. They really believed they could make the difference. And if we could, at the end of this conference, come up with some template answers of what an individual person could do, imagine the millions in India, if they knew which tree to plant. Is it the mangrove? Yes, only in some parts of India. What about solar technologies? Are they available? Can they be funded? So at an individual level, if there was a template which people who want to make a difference know how to set about it, we would actually be able to move with a groundswell of support from below rather than wait for the elaboration at the top, which must happen, but will take time to trickle down.
I'm very sympathetic to the approach you've outlined, which is about the bottom-up empowerment of the poor, and I think it should be a dimension of our discussions over the next 2 days. Jeffrey Sachs, you wanted to come in. Yep.
There are some wonderful market opportunities. The poorest part of the world today is the dryland regions, the Sahel, Central Asia. It's also the conflict zone of the world. It also happens to be the place with the greatest level of solar insolation in the world. And therefore, it is the place that's going to produce much of the electricity of the world a half a century from now, when concentrated solar thermal power is our major energy provider, which it's very likely to be. And so the deserts will bloom, and this is going to be a business opportunity that the likes of Richard Branson can take on and change. Virgin Desert. It's going to change the world, and there are huge opportunities. Finally, it was surprising to me to hear Google, of all places, ask who's in charge. I'd ask who's in charge of the internet. Nobody. We're a globally networked society now, and so we need a new way of global problem solving. Don't look for the address of the person in charge. We're all in charge. This is a networked world. You're making it that way. And so we have to use our networks effectively, and that, I think, is what the Global Humanitarian Forum is so effectively contributing to.